One.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Brown. I am the project director for the AERO World Languages project that you've heard a little bit about this morning. If you joined us earlier in the morning, we had a quick overview of our project. My Robert and I both spoke about the build up of the AERO World Languages team and using standards and benchmarks to create a model curriculum that we now have in place that you will be hearing about for the rest of the day today from our expert team of language teachers around the world. As promised in that first video, we are going to have two experts in assessment and also one of our team leaders, Martina Saluso, with us today to talk about the project and lead off a little bit more for the rest of the day in the actual model units that you're going to see. As you heard us say in the last video, we started with the end in mind. And as one of the few curriculum areas among all the other academic disciplines that had assessments in world languages, it has had assessments for the last 25 years to give us a sense of how do you really build linguistic proficiency over time and over grade spans. We have had an assessment scheme, both in the United States and in Europe. And today we're joined by two incredible experts. It's our delight to have them back again. They did one presentation for us last week in the Multilingual Week presentation on assessment. And today they're going to give you a quick overview of some views that they see the efficacy of assessment today, especially in light of our model program and how both the European side and the American side have come together with a real full understanding of each other's assessment scales. So I'm going to first introduce Elvira Schwender, who is here representing the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And I'm going to let her tell you just a little bit about herself, and then she will introduce our next speaker, Neus, who will explain what she's been working on in the EU. And then we will again this time show you a recorded video because we are already having a little bit of tech issue today. So Martina has stepped in and we hope you're patient, but we're hoping that our recording will be available for you at the end in case you want to view it again or share it, or we also want to have you live in the chat at the end of this session. So assessment is so important, and here to kick it off is Dr. Avira Schwender.
Morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Elvira Schwender, and for 20 years, I was the director of the actual professional programs, overseeing a number of national and international assessment initiatives. But before that, in my previous life, I was a middle school and high school Spanish teacher. I was Senora Schwender to many, many students over the years. I think my aha moment in terms of assessment happened when I went through the actual proficiency tester program and began to integrate a lot of the principles of proficiency teaching and testing into my classroom. During my tenure at ACTFL, I had the privilege of overseeing projects like the development of the ACTFL Proficiency Guidelines in 2012, the performance descriptors for language learners, the ACTFL and assessful can-do statements, tests like the oral proficiency interview by computer, and the K-12 assessment that I'll be talking about a little bit more later, the APPLE, not that APPLE, but the ACTFL assessment of performance toward proficiency in languages. And so I'm very happy to share that information with you, and also very pleased to introduce my colleague and my friend, Neus Figueras, with whom I've worked on some of the ACTFL and European initiatives. Neus?
Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks Christine for inviting me. I'm talking from Barcelona. Like Elvira, I started my career as a teacher, but I taught English. And 20 years later, after having started teaching English, I was sort of roped into the coordination of the assessment system in our adult schools in Catalonia, Spain. And I was seconded to the regional Ministry of Education. So being involved in multilingual assessments, because we were responsible for the assessments of Arabic, Chinese, Spanish, French, German, and English and Russian. I worked very closely with those people, those experts, developing and implementing the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, published by the Council of Europe in 2001, which has had a huge impact in Europe and beyond. And this is where our relationship with Elvira started. Elvira and her background, ACTFL, and we've been enjoying our collaboration and seeing how the two frameworks can interact and actually be related to one another. What I'll be talking to you about today in my presentation is the Common European Framework of Reference, and also mainly about the Trinity in language education, how learning, teaching, and assessment have to go hand in hand to succeed. So I think it's time for me to ask Martina to get started with our video so that you can watch and see if you have any questions that we will very happily respond to at the end of our presentations. See you later.
Okay, so I'll start the video now. Sharing the screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Is it good?
Yes, very good, thank you.
If you just make it full screen, Martina.
Yeah, make it full.
So just the bottom right of the video. When you highlight the video, you'll see a little.
Okay, yes. Making it full screen.
Yeah, great.
We'll also be taking chat live if you want to have questions throughout the presentation. And in the end, Martina Saluso will be talking about our project following Elvira's presentation.
Okay.
What is going on there?
Okay, I was told that there is no sound, so I'm just going to reshare. I apologize for that. Okay, so I'm going to reshare with the sound. Sound, optimize video. Okay, one more time. Okay.
I'm also closely associated with the European Association for Language Testing and Assessment, which is an association of professionals who are interested in assessment, either understood as classroom assessment or understood as high stakes testing. You'll find the address up there, and it's a free membership, so you're more than welcome to join the organization. Before starting and before sharing with you what I'm going to be talking about today, I wanted to share with you a quote from two colleagues of mine, David Little and Gudrun Eriksson, both educators, both experts in the field of language education, language curriculum, and language assessment, who published recently an article where they discussed the importance of engaging students, because if we consider education as a process of people shaping, the first thing that we need to do is to engage those people that we want to get better in their lives and in their world. And one of the aspects that can help language professionals, be they teachers, be they assessors, be they administrators, is to have an assessment paradigm that really matches the interests of the students, the interests of society, the interests of teachers, and actually the design of the curriculum. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is what it has been referred to as the can-do revolution. The can-do revolution has to do with the first attempts by professionals starting in the late 1970s, but mainly in the 1990s and in the year 2000, to describe what students could do with the language, referring to language learning not as something that you learn by heart, but as something that you approach because you're going to be needing it to communicate and also to learn. Language is an instrument for communication, but also for language, for learning of other subjects. And the Common European Framework was published by the Council of Europe in the year 2001 and was very much taken up by professionals in Europe who seemed to need an instrument that would allow them to describe how to teach, how students could learn, and how students could be assessed. What was going on in Europe was very similar to what was going on in Australia or in Canada or in the USA, and you might call it standards, you might call it benchmarks, but the bottom line is that there was an interest in the late 1990s to describe language in a way that would relate to real life. So we talk about ACTFL today, we talk about the CFR, and Christy has just referred to the Australian standards and the Canadian benchmarks. And 2 years ago, the Chinese standards of English were launched, and very soon, as soon as we are all recovered from this sort of chaos that we're living through today, you will be hearing about the Chinese standards that have been developed very rigorously in the same way that the ACTFL standards were developed or the Common European Framework of Reference can-dos were developed. When I'm talking about the CFR, I'm talking about something that will be very familiar for you, and I'm talking about the huge apparatus that is behind the A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2 scales and descriptors that contribute to a description of how languages are learned and taught. So, having talked about standards, it is necessary to talk about what exam organizations abide by those standards, use them, and provide stakeholders with exams, normally high stakes exams. And in the sort of orangey box in the center of my slide, you'll find institutions like Cambridge, Trinity College, Cervantes, Goethe, KPG is from Greece, Euroexam is from Hungary. So all throughout Europe, institutions have been developing exams related to the CFR, can-dos, and levels. And the same has happened with national institutes of evaluation, which have been guided by the CFR in the development of university entrance exams, on school assessments, school leaving examinations, and also universities all across Europe who have been grouped in clusters. They are also referring to the Common European Framework. By the way, any reference in Europe to the Common European Framework is also linked to the Canadian benchmarks and to the ACTFL standards, because there's been a variety of research studies that have allowed comparability across these standards to make life easy for everybody trying to access one test in particular. If you want to access an actual test, you will soon be able to find out what CFR level that test is attesting. But the same thing will happen if you want to take a Cambridge exam. You will find it easy to relate that Cambridge exam score to a score on the TOEFL or on the ACTFL or on the Canadian benchmarks. So far, so good. It looks as if all the assessments in terms of high stakes are comparable. But if we leave a bit the high stakes system where exams are standardized and clearly related to standards or benchmarks or levels, it is worth remembering, what do we do at schools? In fact, at schools for many years, I would say centuries, what we have been doing is decide on an agency that calls for a standard. And I'm going to be talking through this diagram from the top going down. There's a curriculum published. That's the agency that calls for the standard. And that curriculum is broken down into what it means to be at a level and what is expected from students who have been said to fulfill this standard. Having described this, which is a lesson plan or an annual plan in any school, you need an elaborated description of what it means to be able to do this, so that these specifications can become a test. We need to understand what the agency means by a standard so that we can write up a curriculum, develop lesson plans and do teacher training, develop exams, and decide on what cut scores allow us to label a student as a pass and not as a fail. How good is good enough is the decision that needs to be taken. And this decision is normally a rather complex decision that is well researched by exam institutions, but which needs to be clearly stated by teachers. How come that you pass this student and not this other one? How good is good enough? How do you do your standard setting? How do you relate your scores to this? And this is why the standards and the can-dos, either Common European Framework or ACTFL, have come to our help. In fact, I could say my students are low proficiency, my students are high proficiency, my students are beginners. But if you start saying my students are a B1, I need to know that your B1 is like my B1. And I have a proof, I have a way of checking how your B1 is my B1, because I've got a descriptor that describes this. And this is why standards are necessary. Standards are necessary so that we can compare our decisions, our translations of policy onto a test score. And the problem comes when there is no arbiter who says that your how good is good enough is really grounded on research and good studies of cut score setting. Because we need to remember that examinations today need to be, I don't know if you're going to be able to see my slide here. Examinations today need to be honest, reliable, valid, transparent, and above all, portable. My score in Sweden needs to be understood by whoever receives my score in Italy or in Washington or in Colombia. And this is something that the Council of Europe in Europe has been working on very hard. And we're not alone. Other people in other institutions have been working hard on that. Again, so the CFR, trying to talk about my topic, the CFR Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with it, but I'm just going to very briefly give an overview of what the CFR main assets can be said work. The CFR provides a common basis for the elaboration of language syllabuses, curriculum guidelines, examinations, textbooks, etc. across Europe. That was the purpose. The result was that the CFR is used in Taiwan, in China, in South America, in Canada, in the States, and in Australia. And we are all talking to one another to be able to exchange and share what we mean by standards, levels, benchmarks. It is crucial that we all know what we're talking about. It doesn't take long. It just takes some interest and attention. Having done that, it is important to know that the Common European Framework, published in 2001, has been around for 20 years, but changes have been made to the publication, because 20 years after the publication, there's always the need to respond to criticism, but also to respond to the new developments that have been observed in the field. And one of the problems that the Common European Framework showed was that the levels at the top were not sufficiently described, because back in the 1990s, there were not very many foreign language speakers who could claim to be at the end of the scale. Therefore, it was not easy to find descriptors that identified those students. Now, things have changed. So the companion volume to the CFR includes many more descriptors at C1 level and at C2 level. There's also more descriptors at very low levels, not thinking of English or French or German or Spanish, which are the main languages, but thinking of languages which are not as widely learned, languages like Turkish or languages like Dutch or languages like Chinese, that may be assessed at a lower level than A1. So it was decided that there would be a minus A1 described as well. There's in-between levels, because it was perceived it would be necessary. The phonology scale was improved. The term native speaker, considered as a model, was removed. So we do not talk about a native speaker, but a proficient speaker of the language. And the most important bit is that there were new scales added for a number of skills, but mostly for mediation, as it was decided that the schools had a role of mediating cultures, mediating knowledge, and improving learners' knowledge. If you could, okay. You can access all this by accessing this webpage in the Council of Europe, which contains what is referred to as a toolkit for the platform for learning languages. And as you will see in this diagram, at the center, you have the languages of schooling. And the languages of schooling are related to the learner and the languages and school, foreign languages, modern and classical, languages in other subjects, in other subjects, I'm talking about CLIL here, language as a subject, but also in a Europe, which is more and more multilingual, regional, minority, and migration languages. So if you want to spend a Sunday afternoon learning about this, it is worth accessing this platform. I'm now going briefly to introduce you to the new scales that you will be able to access if you access the new categories in the companion volume. The companion volume to the CFR includes new scales for online interaction. Online interaction was not as possible in the 1990s as it is now. Another scale has been added for reading as a leisure activity, referring to extensive reading. Another one on sustained monologue, giving advice. the new scales for phonology, which I would highly recommend you to access, and then scales for mediation, and scales for plurilingual and pluricultural conversations, competences, how students can build on their different languages to improve their communications. Mediation, a brief definition. Mediation is something that's going to be very big in the coming years, and mediation in the CFR goes beyond a sort of informal interpretation, but as any procedure, arrangement, or action in a given social context to reduce the distance between two or more poles of otherness between which there can be tension. If I go with my children on holiday and I go to Italy and they don't speak Italian, I can mediate whatever they need between themselves, between them and somebody else. But it's not only relational mediation. A lot of mediation takes place in classrooms where students learn mathematics or physics in a language which is not their L1. So in clear classrooms, mediation is also crucial. So in this context where we have different sets of standards that are related to one another, but which need to be studied or looked at in depth if one wants to use it. If in a context where it is important that tests are valid, fair, reliable, transparent, and portable, it is important that we get, as professionals, our act together and can allow ourselves to provide our students with good quality assessment, not only in international contexts, the context depicted in the outer circle or national educational systems or school district examinations, but also in the classroom, when we give feedback to our students, when we provide formative assessment or diagnostic assessment, or we focus on assessment for learning using materials that are not always test activities, but sometimes self-assessment checklists or portfolios that really focus on the learner. The challenge here is to be able to link what goes on in the classroom, how teachers, I think we have to go back one, please, how teachers address assessment in their classrooms and how this relates and helps students understand what scores they're going to get in an international exam. And all these drawings that I have around this circle have to do with the many varieties of assessment that we can focus on, be it individual, self-inflicted, co- or peer assessment, or group assessment. In all these areas, we need to focus on getting our act together and doing the best possible job we can do. And in order to achieve this, the challenge presently, I think, is to achieve a higher assessment literacy amongst our teachers, amongst our school directors, and even amongst our public, society, and parents in general. So I think I've gone quite quick, but I look forward to your questions. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that you have an opportunity to respond to your questions when we meet soon.
Thank you, Neus. And this is Elvira Schwender, and I'm going to follow up on a lot of what you heard from in Neus's presentation, talking about an assessment framework for assessment that has been used in the US and is now used internationally. In fact, across more than 60 countries. Just a brief history, many of you may be familiar with the government scale that was created in the 50s to determine how well people could use languages. This scale was then adapted for academia in the 80s. The levels were renamed and more focus was placed on the lower 3 levels because this is where the academic community was more involved. Next slide. The actual proficiency guidelines then describe for speaking, writing, listening, and reading the ability to use language for real world purposes. There are currently 11 levels, similar to the work that's been done with the CEFR to develop more articulation at the highest levels. In 2012, a level of distinguished was added above the level of superior. All of the levels, novice, intermediate, and advanced, are also then subdivided into low, mid, and high for better reporting and articulation. Next slide. The actual proficiency assessment program has grown in the last 25 years to now include multiple assessments of speaking, writing, reading, and listening. What is unique about the actual testing program is that there's one centralized administration through the actual testing office, which is Language Testing International. All actual proficiency tests really use the same guidelines and the same assessment criteria for developing, validating, and rating assessments. And they can be accessed at the website that you see below. Okay, next slide. How are these ratings being used? Well, they're being used across academic, commercial, and also government contexts for many, many reasons, to give college credit, to accredit teachers, credential teachers for teaching. They're used for hiring, for promotion. They're used to evaluate how well programs are achieving their goals of developing language proficiency. Nails mentioned that there has been quite a bit of collaboration between ACTFL and Europeans, Central European Framework Reference Group. And in fact, in the early 2010s, there were 4 conferences that were held between representatives from both the US and from representing the Council of Europe. Each one had a bit of a different focus, but in all, the purpose was to explore crosswalks, correspondences, to talk about research, and to disseminate findings. And in fact, I'll go back just one again. And in fact, one publication that came out of this collaboration aligning frameworks of reference and language testing was edited by Dr. Erwin Turner at the University of Leipzig and is available, actually available through the ACTFL store. Next frame. So these research initiatives have led to some correspondences between ACTFL ratings and CEFR ratings. What we have found in the research is that an ACTFL score can be assigned to, in terms of a CEFR rating, and there are different equivalencies, different correspondencies between the receptive skills and the productive skills. Next slide. So what does all this mean in terms of the K-12 context and in terms of assessing students that are learning languages in schools? Well, to begin with, the World Readiness Standards for Language Learners is a document that describes what learners need to know and be able to do. These are the standards that are commonly referred to as the US standards or the ACTFL standards. The standards talk about the 5 C's, different content areas that need to be part of any language program: communications, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities. So whereas the standards reflect what learners need to know and be able to do, the question then arose, well, how well do students need to know and be able to do or to achieve standards? And to answer this, performance descriptors for language learners was created. Next slide. To show how well. And then the next question was, well, how do we assess this? How do we know how well students are learning to standards? And for this, Actual relied on its main framework of assessment, the proficiency framework, and created a test that tested performance, that is to say, how well students are able to use language that they have learned and practiced in the classroom based on their curricular studies. How well are they able to use language to discuss the content of their learning in the language classroom and in other classrooms. And this assessment was known as the assessment of performance toward proficiency in languages, or as we commonly refer to it as the APPLE. Next slide. What's unique about this assessment is that it is internet delivered. It is a standards-based assessment. In these particular times when so much learning and teaching and learning is happening remotely, this is also an assessment that happens remotely. It is an assessment that addresses all 5 C's, and it addresses 4 modes of communication. It addresses interpersonal listening, speaking. It addresses interpretive reading, interpretive listening, and presentational writing. It assesses academic language, the kind of language that takes place in the classroom, through real classroom linguistic tasks. Those students, they send emails, they listen to blogs, they view documentaries, they engage in video chats, they read literature, they read articles from newspapers. So in fact, the assessment reflects exactly what's happening in the classroom instructional model. There are different forms for grades 5 through 8, 9 through 12, and recently added was for grades 3 and 4, just the interpersonal listening and speaking, and culturally and age appropriate. Scores are reported on the APPLE scale, which has then again subdivided novice and intermediate and advanced into more sublevels. Scores are reported as N1, N2, and 3. You can see on the screen here. And what the scores indicate is how a student might then perform on a broader proficiency test. I wanted to finish up by saying that the actual APPLE scores are now being accepted as part of a program that is nationwide, assigning a seal of biliteracy. This is a credential that appears on students' transcripts to verify that they have attained proficiency in English and 1 or more other world languages. And this seal is being recognized now by universities, by employers, and you can see the dark, what you see in the back there, the states that are very, very dark are states that already have a seal of biliteracy, for which an actual assessment is one of the possible means. The ones in the lighter tan are programs that are in the process of adapting the seal of biliteracy. Last slide. So I'd like to finish up just by reminding everyone that actual assessments are a framework for both proficiency and performance assessments. They offer standardized testing and reporting to the actual testing office. They're available in 60 countries. The assessments can be administered internationally, and the ratings are understood and used across borders. Right now, when we are living in an area of remote testing, all testing is done in a remote fashion. Ratings are portable. Ratings can go from country to country, from continent to continent, and as we like to say, the ratings can go from the classroom to the boardroom, from the academic world to the world of the workplace. Thank you so much, and
Thank you, Elvira. Okay. I will stop sharing now. Neus and Elvira, I would like to give you word maybe to wrap up if you want to say something else before my final part of the presentation.
Hi, this is Elvira again speaking, and I just wanted to provide a bit of an update on the Apple assessment that I spoke about. Today, currently about 500,000 apples are administered every year. There were some questions about the pricing of the Apple. The whole package with all of the modes is $20 per student. And there are a number of schools and programs that have opted to perhaps only do the interpersonal listening speaking, others that have only done the interpretive skills, but it is possible to do the whole package or just to do some of them. Currently, Apple has been administered in 38 countries. It is available in 13 languages. The turnaround time for the interpretive tasks is immediate. It's scored immediately. And the turnaround time for the interpersonal and presentational tasks is about 7 to 10 business days. I just wanted to add one other comment about the role of assessment in the work that we do in learning and teaching. Just administering the Apple had an extremely positive effect upon the entire language program, has had this effect on the language program. And some of the research initiatives that have been carried out have found that that giving the test has, in fact, helped teachers to become much more familiar with the documents, with the can-do statements, with standards, with the performance descriptors, and that there was, based on this and based on the fact that teachers were able to talk about their students in terms of where they were on the performance scale, just giving the assessment has really helped groups of teachers to share a common goal and I guess in a way to say, find that they're all speaking the same language. I encourage you to, if you have any questions about any of the ACTFL assessments, but particularly about the Apple, go to applecentral.com and I'll put that into the chat room for you. And thank you so much for your attention. And now I'm so pleased to turn the program over to Martina. Martina?
Okay. Thank you very much, Elvira. Thank you, Neus. I will be very brief. So I will introduce myself in the context of the entire day today. And I will just wrap up this presentation by showing the way in which the model word language curriculum, which is kind of at the center of our presentations today, how it is addressing everything that was right now presented in terms of the Common European Framework and in terms of the actual assessments. So basically, yes, we said there is a direct alignment between the American assessments by ACTFL and Common European Framework. I will briefly show how the whole work done by the team is also aligned to these external assessments. So I will a little bit, again, talk about the whole project, in which a team of international teachers led by Dr. Christine Brown and supported by the grant from the United States Department of State, used the AERO standards, used, as earlier stated, the backwards design and understanding by design to undergrade the curriculum design for the international schools. So basically, both Elvira and Neus talked about the trinity of the learning, teaching as assessments. So our planning for the model curriculum always started with the assessment. It started with the end in mind. And one of the questions in the chat was also, how is it aligned with the standardized international assessments? So basically, we were looking at the end in mind where students have to be. And here, some of these images you have seen throughout other presentations, but actually, if we're looking at the long sequence learning, if you're looking from kindergarten to grade 12, we're looking to achieve at the very high level of proficiency. And we're looking at some of those exit level exams. We mentioned European Association of Language Testers and Assessments in relation to the Common European Framework. But here I would also like to add that many of our international schools have these exit level exams in terms of IBDP, International Baccalaureate Diploma, in terms of AP, placements, national exams, DELFs. All of those external exams are at a specific level of proficiency. There is a correlation of different IB exams. So the language B, high level, it goes to B2, C1, standard level goes to the related to the European framework B1, B2. So there is a direct correlation, and all this is seen through the model language curriculum. I also want to say that when we planned assessments for the units and in our curriculum, we always planned integrated and performance-based assessments based on the can-do statements, which were mentioned in today's presentation. We try them to be authentic. They're authentic assessments. And looking in the assessments, both summative and formative, we were always looking into making connections to the other content areas of the grade level curriculum. We're also looking into building the intercultural competence through cultures, communities, connections, and comparison. The three logos you are seeing here will be mentioned several times during the day today because they're related to the entire project. Here, I just also want to show briefly how we looked at the grade level assessments for each of the units and how we looked at the grade level benchmarks and standards. So for each unit, we have summative assessments and we have several examples of the formative assessments as well as the way they're aligned. So there is a document showing how they're aligned with specific grade level standards and benchmarks. Okay, I did not fully present myself. So those of you who don't know me, my name is Martina Menzer-Saluzzo. I am French NTAL teacher at the American International School of Zagreb, in Zagreb, Croatia. But here I represent the whole team of language teachers, in this case also curriculum writers from different countries around the world. These pictures are areas either from where we come or the schools where we teach. So I will go very briefly. These are the names. They have been mentioned earlier. These are some of the pictures of our teams. The whole project today, as mentioned in the introductory presentation, we are talking about the Model World Language Curriculum project that started from the students' interest, started from asking the same question to different students around the world. What would you like to learn that is not covered somewhere else in the curriculum? We compared what students around the world said. So student interest was the starting points To that, we added content of social studies, sciences, language arts, health, different areas of the curriculum. Here is the document when we worked, talking about the process of creating the curriculum, how this content was added to the guiding questions for our units, taking into consideration Common European Framework, AERO standards, ACTFL, based on the ACTFL, but also other paradigms such as the OECD PISA. All this was mentioned in the introductory presentation today. Okay, so the focus is not only on the language progression and communication, but also on the progression in content and learning through language. Again, some of the framework that were considered. Later today, we're going to talk about our overall model curriculum. We will talk about overarching grade level questions. We will talk about guiding unit questions, 5 units for each grade level. Here, when we look at what is the end, so looking at the final assessment after a long-term learning of a foreign language, so grade 5, grade 12, the overarching grade level question, how can intercultural understanding and engagement contribute to our personal and global well-being? This is kind of an overarching, encompassing assessment that we would like students to be able to answer at the end of our going through the model level curriculum. So later today, we will also talk about the online platform that we're using to house the curriculum. As of today, our page, our public site of the AERO Modern Language Curriculum is available through Atlas. So all the schools which have Atlas will be able to access it. So in the public sites area, under the Office of Overseas School, I will later post it in the chat, so you will have a direct link. This will be the page with some information about the project. These are some of the pages from Atlas, which we are going to in detail describe and elaborate in the following units. I just want to stress here that all the units were collaboratively created, peer-reviewed. They have resources in different languages. And as Chrissy mentioned in the first session today, they will be transferable into your school Atlas. So if you want to import them, as long as you give credit to the project, you can easily import them, reuse them in any way you want. Okay, and I will finish by saying that as passionate language teachers from around the world, we like to look at the World Language Program as the glue to the curriculum of an international school. I want to wrap by saying that our model World Language Curriculum is content-based as well as conceptual. It has an interdisciplinary approach. It ties content thought in other areas as well as students' interest. And it is really important for the international schools because it is important for the target students in our schools. It is important not just to be bilingual, but multilingual. This has become the norm today. And it's really important to work on their raising multilinguistic and multicultural awareness. So in the sessions that follow, we are going to present in details examples of units and grade level questions from elementary section, middle school section, and high school section. A session today is dedicated to each of those sections. And we will also share assessments and resources in multiple languages. And with that, I would like to again give word back to Chrissy. I know we are running almost out of time, but the floor is yours. We'll be gladly answering any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you so much to everyone today for another stellar performance on assessment in general. I want to just point out that although Elvira talked a little bit about the Apple and its availability, we're not in any way pushing you to use the Apple. Those of us that use it and understand it like it, but I also want to speak to the fact that there are countrywide tests in other countries, the DELF and the DALPE, those are being used both in Spain and in France. So there are many assessment tools that you can use. One of the ones that is online and easy to use and Java enabled is the Apple. We'd like you, of course, to take the test drive with that. And if you or your schools are interested in trying it, we encourage you to try it. We encourage you to use those other assessments that are based on the Common European Framework also. So there's no real sales motivation here for any of us. It's just that you find those best tools and maybe even using multiple tools. We have those, of course, available in language arts, math, science. And so most of the international schools that we work with, the State Department works with around the world, and there are 200 of them, but thousands more that are using those assessments in math, science, and language arts. So it's important to use some kind of an assessment that is tied to either one of the two frameworks so that students and parents in world languages can see their progress in the same way they do in math, in language arts, and in science around the world. It also helps diplomats, of course, as they move, or expats from one part of the world to the other, to have, as Neus and Elvira both talked about, the portability of an assessment and a scale and an understanding of where you rest on that is totally worldwide. So we just want to thank everyone today. I think we have some great questions in the chat. Martina has posted the site for Atlas. Again, you're not required to be an Atlas user to access this site. If you have Atlas in your school and you want to copy the units over, Atlas and our office will help facilitate that for you. But you can access our site at Atlas open source. So we want to thank you, and we will answer your questions as we go on through the day today. If you have more questions on assessment, certainly Martina and I will be on. Not sure if Elvira and Neus can be on, but we would love for you to pop in and out throughout the day too, just to see the incredible units that we have planned and to understand how every one of those units has started with the end in mind. So I think we'll stop right there. It's time for us to say goodbye, but we'll see you in about another half an hour or so, or hour, and hope to hear from you all as after the day even. So thanks a lot for being here, and thanks to our presenters for a fantastic job.
Thank you.